Okay, Bea, just for context, because this is
Okay.
going to come up at least another 15 times today.
Yes.
uh,
Wow.
Julie tracked down my sister's contact information and has been using it to prank me from across the country.
I already know that.
Wait, you already knew this?
Thank you, May. It gets better and better every time.
How many people
Aiden doesn't know who knows it, who
about
doesn't.
this? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Theo Table, where angels dancing on the head of a pin can change your life. I'm Aiden, also known as Celtic Catholic Fire.
I'm Jarek.
I'm Julie, also known as B1 as We Are One on iFunny.
And today we have a very special guest.
Hello, I'm Bea, and I tweet at Bea Culpa, Bea Maxima Culpa on Twitter.
So, we're all Catholics talking about theology on the internet, and we're joined by another Catholic you may know from the internet. So it seems appropriate to talk about a little bit what that's like.
Our question for today is how can and how do we evangelize by means of the internet?
Yeah. I mean, there are some straightforward ways. Like, for example, I always talk about my YouTube handle, Celtic Catholic Fire, at the beginning of every episode. And I do that in part because I like my YouTube channel, and it's Catholic related, so if you like this podcast, you might like my YouTube channel. But more importantly, it's very much apologetics focused. The whole point of my channel is to talk about the different things Catholics believe and argue for why, logically, we should believe them. And I feel like at some level that's a really good use of the internet for a form of evangelization, just because the internet can be a little impersonal sometimes, which makes it not as good for face-to-face interactions, but good for talking about ideas. And so if you have a debate on ideas, and if you talk about sort of the intellectual part of the faith, that seems like a good way to use the internet to help spread Catholicism.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I am actually, you could very reasonably say I am only Catholic because of the internet. Because the ideas I wasn't being taught that I should have been taught in my, religion class in a Catholic school, I found discussed on the internet. You go and you find all the ideas and you discuss them. Or argue them. I also did apologetics on the internet for a while. But I think something that I've noticed more going on and seeing Catholics in real life, seeing real practicing strong Catholics in real life, which was not something I saw when I was in the internet apologetics loop, which is a glorious loop, is that there's so much more to evangelization than apologetics are essential because people, especially people today, demand a why. But they're not the only way to evangelize on the internet. The first example I would think of is the extremely well-known Bishop Barron. And his videos, there's some explanation in there, but a lot of them are just commentary. And it doesn't necessarily take an argumentative stance. And getting into an argument in the comment boxes is kind of the black hole elephant in the room, in my mind, of internet evangelization. How do you separate evangelization from just an argument?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in addition to that, a lot of my sort of growing up in the faith is also informed by the internet. In particular, I was really interested in liturgy, and so reading websites like the New Liturgical Movement or now Liturgical Arts Journal was a really strong way for me to sort of be engaged with a tradition I really knew nothing about. I, didn't experience traditional liturgy in any sense when I'm at home. And I'd never been to, an old form of the Latin Mass until I got into Notre Dame, but I knew a lot about it because of these websites, where people talked about these ideas which you really know nothing about and you can't experience. And so in that sense, I think the internet is a really good way to sort of give monologues and, present these sort of, monolithic things. The discussion part, as Julie was talking about with the black hole comment boxes, gets more complicated. But I think in terms of, presenting a single page, a single view, the internet is a great way to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, in some ways, the internet actually is very useful for Catholicism, because the Catholic Church, like, Catholic means universal. That's literally the meaning of the word. So, as the universal church, as the universal Christian church, having the ability to talk to someone halfway around the world in a language you don't speak, thanks to the internet, and talk about your shared faith and your shared experience of the faith, that can be a very powerful thing as well. The connectivity that the internet brings, in some sense, is only made greater because it's through the connectivity of the church.
Yeah, I think now's a good time to mention the three of you had this triangle of knowledge before any of you met in person, which still totally blows my mind.
Yes.
Like, that totally blows me away.
Yeah.
Who wants to
Bea,
start?
do you want to explain? Do you want to explain the triangle, Bea?
Yeah, so I was first on iFunny, just running my own account, but I started a Catholic account after seeing, around the time that Planned Parenthood was, all these videos came out about all these fetuses being chopped up, and I remember seeing that picture, and that alone, it just made me want to, get into all this, the new evangelization and making a Catholic account. So I created a account on iFunny by the name of Carmelite, and Julie's on iFunny,
Yeah, so I ran, it's still a very low-level active, an iFunny account called B1 as we are one, like the numbers 1, after a verse in the Gospel of John. And I started that because I had become Catholic with the internet, actually, just to a brief elaboration on Aiden's point about connecting between, like, continents and people. You can also connect between time. Like, I found the church fathers on the internet, and, like, what teenager is reading documents from the 200s on the internet?
Absolutely.
Like, you can do that on the Catholic internet. Or just sermons from Fulton Sheen from 50 years ago. Like, it's amazing. All
or
the
commentary. In my case, it was things like commentary on 13th century liturgical norms. There's this huge breadth of things you can find on the internet, which you can't access to otherwise. Yes. Anyway, Julie.
Yeah, so because the only way I knew some of the basics, facts about basic, like, elementary apologetics, things any Catholic should be taught, but the average Catholic's catechesis is, like, in the grade school level. I figured it made me sad that just literally my classmates next to me wouldn't know that. So being the shy, closeted, and engaged Catholic that I was, I went to the internet as well, and I made an iFunny account for apologetics, and we called them essays, but really, sometimes they were informative, and it was like telling your own denomination really in the community, like, here's more about this idea, but a lot of time it was actually engagement with there was evangelicals and Catholics and atheists, and there was a lot of debate. But to complete the triangle, so I had this iFunny account, and Bea followed me. Then while Bea was following me on this iFunny account, I discovered Aiden's YouTube channel, who I didn't know Aiden at the time. I just saw this kid named Catholic Celtic Fire making YouTube videos, and I was like, that's really darn cool.
You got the name wrong, Julie.
Everyone gets the name. They always get the name wrong.
I've known this kid for 2 years, and I still say it wrong. More than that, if you count the internet years. Celtic Catholic Fire. There we go.
There you go. And just to round this all out, I actually, I made a Twitter account after the March for Life, my freshman year of college, to help the march and then to advertise my YouTube channel. And I've been following Catholic Twitter before that, but when I actually had a Twitter account and was posting Catholic things, I started following some other Catholic Twitter accounts, including Bea's. Hey. And so we all ended up meeting up. Notre Dame Theology Club was kind of interesting semi-reunion we didn't know we'd have. Which is really cool. And it's talking about this connectivity, but I think Bea brings up another good point we should be talking about in terms of Catholics on the internet, and that was the new evangelization. And that's the topic. Technically it's a couple decades old. It was a movement started by Pope St. John Paul the Great as essentially a way to spread the faith and evangelize in a world and a culture that was Christianized, but not Christian, and I feel like we might be able to talk about that.
Yeah. I feel like when a lot of people talk about the new evangelization, they think immediately of, Catholic Twitter and, Bishop Barron's podcast and all that stuff. And that stuff is wonderful, but, what the new evangelization fundamentally means is Pope John Paul finally made public the idea that, there were a lot of people who were raised Catholics, who were raised Christians, but didn't engage with the faith. They were, doubting their faith, or they just weren't practicing, they weren't going to Mass, whatever the case may be. And so the new evangelization for Pope John Paul II was the way to reach out to those people who were technically Catholic and who were technically within the Church, but weren't as engaged as they could have been, or as engaged as he thought they should have been. He wasn't talking about the internet, which didn't exist in 1983 when he published his documents. He wasn't talking about Catholic Twitter or podcasts. He was talking about evangelizing Catholics. And that's something I think that we sometimes forget to do, is that, okay, you're baptized, you're confirmed, you're sort of, good to go, just leave you in autopilot. That's not how it works at all. And I think all four of us can testify to that.
And I think, actually, speaking of this podcast and evangelizing to Catholics, that's sort of the goal we came into this in mind, that people think of theology as angels dancing on the head of a pin. It's like this weird technical stuff that doesn't really apply to your life, but that's not really true. That's really not what theology is for, and theology, if you actually study it and learn about it, can be really, really helpful for your faith life. Which is what I hope we're accomplishing here, and if we're not, anyone who's listening to this, feel free to let us know as loudly as possible. Because we're trying to be a part of this movement. And as Jarek was saying, this wasn't really grounded in the internet. Like, the internet wasn't a thing, and it wouldn't be for quite a while. But the internet has sort of provided a unique opportunity to carry this out. Mm-hmm. So I know Julie's talked about her story a little. And similarly, my family were converts from Methodism. I was starting to get interested in apologetics, but wasn't really engaged in my faith life so much. And then through Catholic memes of all places, the online Facebook group for Catholic memes, I was introduced to the YouTube group New Catholic Generation, and then started my own channel, and was really able to more deeply engage in my faith. And I had to, because I was trying to talk about it for other people. And so I think the internet can be a good way to live out the new evangelization.
Mm-hmm. That being said, there are also ways in which the internet is unideal for evangelization. I don't remember exactly who said it. Maybe one of you guys knows exactly who said the whole thing about weird Catholic Twitter. But there's this idea of maybe somebody else should explain it better than me. I don't really know how to explain the whole thing.
Do you mean the I'm just guessing what you're saying here. I think you mean the tendency of the internet, because so many ideas can be exchanged, you can also become very into little sectarian. You can have a little group of your little radical sect.
Yeah.
And sometimes, in a very extreme form, a radical, rad trads.
Yeah.
Basically, radical traditionalists. It's the longer version of that. Because that can be, because you're absolutely right. Seeing the internet can bring out. We've talked about us personally. The internet did some good for us in the evangelization front, but people can get nasty on the internet, and Catholics are not exempt from that.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes on Catholic Twitter, you can see how we have all these different camps, between weird Catholic Twitter and normie Catholic Twitter and trad Catholic. Did I already say trad Catholic Twitter? And left Catholic Twitter. We have all these different camps that we like to divide ourselves in, and you can I suppose identify, but ultimately, as Catholics, our identity lies in Christ. So, and at the same time, people will separate themselves in groups. For example, charismatics who love praise and worship, and the traditionalists who love the Latin Mass, and they'll demonize one another, when ultimately we have to remember the Catholic Church is the universal church, and we need to build one another up rather than tearing each other down. And that's something you see there on the internet. So
absolutely.
And
this doesn't.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Julie.
No, you go ahead, Jared.
No, go.
All right. Well, my thing doesn't directly follow, but it's kind of related. And I was thinking, we were talking about how people, you can get very sectarian on the internet, and all these labels, this kind of Catholic, that kind of Catholic, and I just think because that can happen in the parish environment too, or really any group of people, like Catholics.
Yeah.
The internet just, I think, exacerbates that tendency that already exists.
Yeah.
Like, you'll say, oh, this priest is, like, liturgically
Yeah.
excellent, and this one only preaches about whatever. And I don't know, I think it just reminded me, it just reminded me in a really roundabout way that the internet can't be a substitute for a Catholic community either. The new, I think it's actually really Jarek's point from earlier, is that the new evangelization doesn't just mean the internet. Like, it has to continue in real life. To demonstrate this with the three of us, we all knew of each other from the internet. We knew, oh, hey, that's this channel, that's her Twitter, that's her account, but we didn't know each other. We only know each other because we saw each other in person, and I think it's, like, you can get a radical conversion on the internet, but, like, that person has to follow up with an actual community.
Yeah.
Mm.
And honestly, I think that's maybe a good way to, I don't know about diagnose, but at least point out some of the problems with the internet itself, because this has come up so far on the podcast, that we can use the internet for a lot of good. But we shouldn't be discounting the fact that the internet has been used for a lot of bad and can be used for a lot of bad.
And is still used for a lot of bad.
Exactly.
Yes, it very much continues to be, yes. And at the, like, there's in some ways it lets you connect more with people from, like, different backgrounds, even different times, as Julie pointed out earlier. But, more importantly, it's through a screen, it's through an avatar, a profile, a channel, that even if you're seeing someone face-to-face, like if you're watching this on YouTube, even if you're seeing someone face-to-face, there's still something really impersonal about interactions on the internet. And that makes it, I think, really, really easy to demonize people. And, like, as Bea and Julie were talking about, like, driving people into your camps, and, like, these people are the virtuous ones and everyone else is evil.
Yeah.
Which is not a thing we want to be doing as Catholics.
No,
That's
isn't.
just
Yeah.
not a good way to evangelize.
Especially between between groups of Catholics. Like, and that's not to say that there aren't differences. There are fundamental differences. Like, all four of us, I think, would put ourselves in some sense in certain camps, or at least say that we ally ourselves with particular camps more than other ones. But, like, and we're not saying those differences are unimportant, and we're not saying that those differences don't matter, but I think what the fundamental point is that we have to be cautious and cognizant of the fact that while we do have differences, the commonality is more important.
So, we've talked a lot about, we said how the internet was so useful in the new evangelization, and we talked about how it can be detrimental to the new evangelization, but what actual actions, I guess, be they in person, or what? Like, what supplements the new evangelization besides the internet? Because, as Jarek has mentioned, it's not just the internet. What else are we called to do with this idea of evangelizing to Catholics, to each other?
I think the biggest thing that comes into mind for me is related to Rod Dreher is a yeah, you'd call him a conservative, like, commentator, and he has this book called The Benedict Option, which was released a couple years ago. It's pretty controversial. Not everyone has an opinion on it, but most people who've heard of the book have a very strong opinion on it, and most of those strong opinions are not as the result of reading the book well. But that's not the point.
Right.
His
Rod Dreher,
idea
though, wants to sort of isolate, is his whole thing, is sort of build an ark, so to speak, right? That keep your family safe, keep the people you care about safe from the problems with the culture.
To a degree, but I think that's, like, the whole building an ark metaphor is important, but I think what's more important is that, like, your faith has to be cultivated in a communal setting.
Yeah.
You have to be raised in a culture and in a community that forms you in faith. I mean, he makes a big deal about education. And the point about, like, putting your kids in Catholic school or putting your kids in a Christian school isn't to, like, just to isolate them from the horrors of public school, whatever. It's to raise them in a community and put them in a culture where the faith isn't just accepted, but it's allowed to flourish. And I think that's something that I discovered when I came to Notre Dame. I didn't really have a community like that before then.
Yeah.
And at Notre Dame, there are so many different communities of Catholics, each of which is trying to help all of its members, and each person trying to help everybody grow in their faith life in a very special and very effective, in my opinion, way. And I think that's the seedbed for the new evangelization of these communities of people.
That's very true. It's very true. In another sense, though, because there's sort of two parts to the new evangelization. One part is making sure that the next generation stays Catholic, that we raise people in the faith and keep people, show people how the faith is worth keeping to. But another huge part of the new evangelization is trying to re-evangelize a culture that thinks it knows what Christianity is because it thinks it's heard it all before, but doesn't.
Yeah.
And for that, I think, and it has to go well beyond the internet, because the only way we're going to accomplish re-evangelizing the culture and, again, showing the world what Catholicism really is, requires us living out our faith in a radical way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm talking anywhere from the early Christian martyrs to St. Francis, who stripped naked in front of his father and the entire town and went off to live a life of poverty and ended up reconverting most of Europe because of how holy his life was.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, it means we have to be necessary. It becomes necessary for us to make the hard choices to be public witnesses for our faith in ways that might not be popular. And sometimes that means siding with Republicans when Democrats want you not to, and sometimes that means siding with Democrats when Republicans want you not to. Sometimes it's not political, but oftentimes it can be. That we live in a very aggressively secular culture. And we keep, to fight a culture that is sick, you don't fight the people in that culture, because the whole point of fighting a culture is trying to help and ultimately lead those people to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be willing at some point to fight the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think, going off that, that is most effectively done in person. At least for me.
Absolutely.
I mean...
Absolutely.
Yeah. That is most effectively done in personal interactions with people you disagree with, personal interactions with people whom you have a tendency to demonize and who have a tendency to demonize you. I think that the internet is good for some things, again, the monolithic sort of expositions of whatever, or these making these texts available and having forums for discussion, especially with people who already agree with you. But it's not a substitute for people, for personal interaction.
Yeah. Actually, I'd want to just point out another way the internet can be used in this new evangelization, while at the same time, emphasizing the people. So, if you think, so I'm thinking specifically about Facebook right now, but this applies to a lot of situations. Because on that particular platform on Facebook, you see what the people close to you or vaguely related to you, you met them twice and friended them. You see what they like, you see not just what they share, but you see what they like as well. So I think it's kind of abstract, but you can kind of plant a seed, just throw it out there, hey, there are still people who believe this stuff. And it reminds me of, it is connected, I promise, of the way I heard evangelization described to me the first time. Ironically, by a Catholic YouTube video from a Protestant convert. And it was the idea, I think it was Steve Wright. I hope that meant. And the idea was that you don't walk up to a stranger on the street and say, can I have your kidney? I need a kidney. Donate your kidney to me. And that's kind of, and when you ask someone, and when you try to encourage someone in their faith, it's kind of it is a radical request. It's more intense than donating the kidney in a spiritual way. And so I think just being able to throw the faith kind of out there casually online actually helps a lot with that in-person, you're evangelizing people closest to you. At least in my case, my family, extended family now, will ask me random questions, and most of the time it's to start an argument, but, they will bring it up because of the little impersonal poke with the internet. It can start a greater dialogue.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
And then that's
but,
sort of the
yeah,
question
but
posed,
ultimately, going off that, it's great that when through the vehicle of the internet, we're exposed to all these different options, and some either attract us or they either bring us to faith or they don't, because if you think about it, evangelization is, we're all fishers of men, and there are all these different faiths, and like some will work for some people and some won't for other people. For example, like as I said earlier, the charismatics and praise and worship, that fits like a certain group of people, like those who are like big on Life Teen and Steubenville conferences, and whereas you have people who are more so drawn to the the Catholic intellectual tradition or the more traditional liturgies. But we always have to remember, like on the internet, we can't demonize one another for like holding these views, because we have to remember we're like in the epistles I'm not a Cephas Catholic, or it's like I'm a Jesus Catholic. That's who we are.
As a reference, there's one of the epistles of St. Paul where Paul said, let no one say, I am of Paul, or I am of Apollos, or I am of Cephas.
Peter.
That's Peter. But St. Paul's point was, like, I don't remember which epistle it was, but he was saying, don't put yourself in these categories before you put yourself in the category of being a Christian, which is what all of these categories are.
But yeah, Jarek, sort of building off that point and also connecting back to what Bea said just before that this doesn't just apply to Catholics. As we've talked a lot about different groups of Catholics on the internet, but in some sense this has to be extended to the Church of all believers as well, because of course Catholicism is the church. We have the fullness of the truth. But our Protestant brothers and sisters and other Christian denominations do participate in that same church. So I think in some sense we have to take that same approach to ecumenism, to like trying to bridge the gap with people of other faiths, but we can still build on common ground with.
Oh, absolutely. Aiden, that's my bread and butter. See, I love the evangelicals. I wanted to be, like, the evangelicals also brought onto the internet. It's very strange, because that was the community I saw in person. I saw a different Christian faith, like, acting Christian in person. Not to diss my local Catholics. Like, they're good people. They are. They really are. But that's what happened. No, they are. I just saw the evangelicals being more Christian.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, diocese. I do not care. But this is why I went to the internet. It all comes full circle, because on the internet, it was a community. It was the iFunny Christian community. It wasn't the iFunny evangelicals community and the iFunny Baptist community and the iFunny Catholic community. There was actually this great dialogue. And, like, that's the reason I have, like, there are Protestants from the app I talk to regularly. Like, there was a lot of mutual understanding between churches that happened because of that community on the internet. Difficult as it is to build authentic community on a screen, if you do invest the time, you become close enough to someone to ask them to like point to a different form of church, like the Catholic Church, and like donate their metaphorical kidney. And you have conversions. Okay, this is it's a long story, but like. No, but you get evangelicals who one day are saying, like, Catholics worship Mary, and, like, very skeptical of the idea, and then the next day they're Catholic. Not the next day, but... Or, like, you have a genuine conversation with a Lutheran and think he's Catholic. I'm just saying, like, the internet is a great space for ecumenical dialogue. Like, this is a very convoluted way to say that.
And at least
I'm just enthusiastic because it's real.
So yes.
And at least it shows you, like, that, like, there's so many, like, as much as we want to put ourselves in groups, not to go back to the whole individual thing, but, like, each person, like, has such a different take on everything. You meet all kinds of people on the internet, as I'm sure most of you know. But, like, it shows you that, like, even if we don't have a good way of, like, talking about it on the internet, it shows you that, like, the person can't be reduced to the number of groups they belong to.
So that's a very profound point, Jarek, but I think I have a better one. That for taking all of this, that if, in other words, what I'm seeing here,
You're fine,
what
man.
I'm seeing here is that if we want to, like, really do the new evangelization well, what we should be doing, we shouldn't be going on the internet to make ourselves popular. We
Make
shouldn't
friends.
be going on the internet to preach as loudly as possible. We should be going on the internet just to make friends and go with that.
It works.
No, but it's seriously, that if you're on the internet to make
Friends
friends,
with common
quite what
interest.
you mean.
then you can actually convert people. You can actually make a difference in people's lives. If you're on the internet to preach, you may not do so well.
There you go.
Oh, I think that's a little bit limited. I don't know if we could just limit it all to
Okay,
yeah.
fine. As someone
I mean-
who preaches on the internet for a YouTube channel, I see your point.
But I mean, and granted, take what I have to say with a grain of salt, because I'm the only one of the four of us who isn't actively have a online Catholic personality or whatever the heck. You want
Online
to think
Catholic.
of that.
So I have my real world personality and the online Catholic personality. It's like a
What I
Dr. Jekyll and
mean,
Mr. Hyde thing. At some point, it comes and takes over my brain and plugs me into my phone.
Which one are you right now? Because I really want to know.
Ask me in 15 minutes. I think my brain is somewhat fried.
Okay, that was quite the answer I was expecting. But anyway, there's so many ways you can use the internet. You can just use the internet to upload tons of sermons of Saint Basil of Caesarea. You don't want to have to make friends. You can just want to throw words on the internet that you don't think people can get to otherwise. Sometimes the internet can be impersonal, and that's okay.
Anon.
I would also... Oh, Bea, go ahead.
There are people who run Anon accounts, for example. On Catholic Twitter, we had Woke Space Jesuit, and he was
Yes.
a real funny account. He died out
He got banned, didn't he?
some while ago. Yeah. For telling someone to he was gonna flush them down the toilet or something like that. It was really weird.
Yeah. Just as a last tidbit on that point, which was friends and Catholics, I think friendship is a useful tool in thinking about how to evangelize well, but like Jarek was saying, it's not the only way on the internet. Like Bishop Barron, he's the poster child for it. He's not out there making friends on the internet. I love his comments on his comment boxes. And look at us. We are friends acting friendly and talking about theology on the internet. And it's on a preachy, as its owner describes it, channel. So, I don't know. There's lots of ways to do it, but we somehow make it work. Or try
And
it.
speaking of preaching, I believe it is time to close in prayer. So, Bea, would you like to lead us off?
All right. In the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit. Grant us, O Lord, minds to know you, hearts to seek you, wisdom to find you, conduct pleasing to you, faithful perseverance in waiting for you, and hope of finally embracing you.
Amen.
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 Amen.